Hi students, welcome to BIOL-11 week 10. Today we're going to begin our discussion of mammalian anatomy, which is covering the fetal pig dissection. So I've posted a video showing in detail a dissection of a fetal pig onto Blackboard. It's a YouTube link, so you should go through it and use that video to complete the activities in your lab manual for this week. So over the next few weeks, we're basically going to be just covering fetal pig anatomy. But today we're going to discuss the structures of the respiratory system and the digestive system. Next week, we'll cover the circulatory system, which with these two systems that we're covering today, work very closely to support tissues with oxygen, nutrients, and water, and to remove waste substances and carbon dioxide from the body. So the main function of the respiratory system is to facilitate gas exchange. This is the intake of oxygen and export of carbon dioxide waste via the lungs. The digestive system takes in food and along its very long and tortuous path through the body, completes chemical and physical digestion of food into its simplest forms. So these small building blocks are known as macromolecules. Protein in food is broken down into amino acids. Carbohydrates are broken down into simple sugars, and fats are broken down into triglycerides and fatty acids. So there are many glands that work in this system to produce enzymes that are necessary to break all these substances down. So before starting our dissections, we would generally begin by examining the external anatomy of our fetal pigs. You'll recognize many of the structures, such as the eyes, the nose, mouth, the forelimbs. As you remember from our other lessons in comparative anatomy, the limbs of the pig are subdivided into smaller subunits. We have the shoulder, we have the elbow or the knee in the hind limbs, the wrist or the ankle in the hind limbs, and then followed by the hoof, and even some digits. The umbilical cord is also still attached to these pigs. This is the connection between the fetus as it developed inside the mother's uterus. The umbilical cord basically attached the pig to the placenta. The placenta is a specialized tissue that develops during pregnancy to integrate the mother's and the fetus's circulatory systems. It provides the fetus with oxygenated blood from the mother and nutrients until birth. So nipples are also visible on the external surface of the fetal pigs. After birth, the mammary glands in the mother will begin to produce milk to feed the pig's young, and this is excreted through openings in the nipples. This is the defining characteristic of the animal group known as mammals. We can also identify the external anatomy of the urinary, reproductive, and digestive systems. In male pigs, the urogenital opening is located immediately posterior to the umbilical cord, meaning that it's on the side closest to the rear end of the animal. Under the tail is the anus, or the external opening of the digestive system. In males, immediately anterior or closer to the head of the body, anterior to the anus is the scrotal sac in males, and what is known as the genital papilla in females. This is a fleshy projection in the female pig, and behind this papilla is the urogenital opening. And so we move into the oral cavity. The oral cavity constitutes the opening of the digestive and the respiratory systems. So in this view, which cuts the sides of the jaw of the animal, if you think of like a Heath Ledger in Batman kind of cut along the sides of the mouth, you can visualize the structures inside because you're able to pull the jaw all the way down. So the tongue takes up most of the lower jaw here. Behind the tongue is the epiglottis, which is a small flap that projects into the oral cavity and protects the opening of the airway from food accidentally traveling down there. On the top of the oral cavity, we can see the teeth, we can see a hard palate. Behind that is the soft palate. And before we get to the pharynx there, which is the entrance to the respiratory system. So beyond the pharynx, we have the anatomy of the neck region and the thoracic cavity. So the pharynx leads into the larynx, which contains the voice box. And then after the larynx, we have the trachea, which is the main tube leading down into the lungs. Surrounding the trachea are two very important glands. We have the thyroid gland and the thymus gland. The thyroid gland is important to regulating the body's metabolism, and the thymus gland works for the adaptive immune system. So all the T cells in the body develop originally in the thymus gland. This is why they are named the T cells. So this region, from the neck to the thin diaphragm below the lungs, is known as the thoracic cavity. It contains the bronchi, the tubes which branch off from the trachea, and these lead into the lungs. It also contains the pericardial cavity, which contains the heart, and it's further subdivided into the right and the left pleural cavities, which contain the right and the left lungs, respectively. So putting the head and the thoracic cavities together, we can trace the path of air through the respiratory system. So when an animal inhales, the muscular diaphragm that seals the thoracic cavity draws down. This creates a negative pressure which pulls in oxygenated air through the nose and the mouth, through the pharynx, then the larynx into the trachea, where it then moves from there into the bronchi and the bronchioles until air reaches the smallest subunit of the respiratory system, known as the alveoli. So these are small bubble-like projections where gas exchange is actually physically taking place. So the alveoli is where the respiratory system and the circulatory system team up to carry oxygen to the body's tissues. Remember that gases can pass through thin cell membranes, and substances will move from an area of higher concentration to lower concentration. Well, the walls of the alveoli are about 1 cell thick and are wrapped with the smallest of blood vessels, also with walls that are 1 cell thick. These are known as the capillaries. So gases, in this case carbon dioxide and oxygen, are able to diffuse across these membranes according to their concentration gradients. Oxygen moves into the oxygen-depleted blood, and this is replaced in the lungs by carbon dioxide, which is built up in the blood to a high concentration. So when the diaphragm relaxes, oxygen moves to the cells in the bloodstream, and carbon dioxide-rich air is expelled from the lungs. So posterior to the thoracic cavity is the abdominal cavity. Here we have some major organs involved in the digestive system. So firstly, the peritoneum is a thin membrane that encircles the organs of the abdominal cavity, and this is cut away in this photograph here. The mesenteries are part of this peritoneum, which act as a sort of anchor in the abdominal cavity. Basically, they attach the small intestine, pancreas, and these other organs to the posterior wall of the abdomen, so they're not just free-floating in the abdominal cavity. So the esophagus leads down from the throat into the stomach, and from the stomach, this empties into the small intestine. So the spleen, the pancreas, the gallbladder, and the liver are also present in this cavity, with the pancreas and the gallbladder secreting enzymes into the small intestine directly. They secrete it into the duodenum, which is the name for the first part of the small intestine. So the duodenum is the first part of the small intestine. This is followed by the jejunum and the ileum. The ileum is the longest part of the small intestine. So in the lower section of the abdominal cavity, we have the large intestine, which is known as the colon. The ileum empties into the first part of the large intestine, which is also known as the cecum. I know, this is very, very term heavy. There's really just no way around it in anatomy. But I'm trying to not bombard you with too many details. So the appendix is actually attached to the cecum, this first pouch in the large intestine. So the large intestine, also known as the colon, wraps around the top of the small intestines and then finally empties into the rectum, where the remains of digested food, known as feces, are stored before they're excreted through the anus. We also have, as I mentioned, the gallbladder and the pancreas, which help to secrete enzymes to help digest food further. So like I said, the primary function of the digestive system is to physically and chemically digest food. Physical digestion consists of chewing food with the teeth and the tongue, followed by continued breakdown in the stomach by the muscular walls of the stomach itself. So the body also secretes several enzymes which help the chemical breakdown of the main components of food, carbohydrates, proteins, and lipids, or fat, into their smallest subunits for transport to all cells of the body. These small subunits are able to be transported across the plasma membranes. So as food travels from the mouth to the pharynx and into the esophagus, amylase is secreted in the saliva and begins acting on carbohydrates to break them down there. The food then enters the stomach, and proteases are secreted there to digest protein. After being digested in the stomach, the food moves into the small intestine, where the enzyme lipase is secreted to help finally digest the fats. So in cows and other ruminant animals that have these extensive digestive systems, these animals produce the enzyme cellulase, and this is able to break down the complex carbohydrate cellulose from plant cells. So this enzyme is not present in most other animals, including humans, where cellulose is just excreted from the body as fiber. So as food is broken down into small subunit molecules, the body again uses a similar strategy as it did in the alveoli to transport nutrients into the bloodstream. The small intestine contains a multitude of small projections known as villi. So these have very thin membranes, and inside these villi contain capillaries. So amino acids, fatty acids, and simple sugars are then able to be transported from the digestive cavity across these thin membranes into the bloodstream. The function of the small intestine essentially is to absorb the nutrients from food after digestion has taken place. Whatever is not absorbed is moved into the large intestine. And so in the large intestine, this is where water is reabsorbed from food, from the interior of the digestive system into the cells of the colon. And then finally, the remains of food here are then compacted and excreted as feces. Okay, so there is an overview of the two systems that you have to review today. So please watch the YouTube dissection that I posted on Blackboard and complete your lab manual activities, and let me know if you have any questions. Have a great weekend.